Hi, my name is Walter Ochinko. I'm the Research Director at Veterans Education Success. So you're probably wondering, what is Veterans Education Success? The mission of VES, for short, Veterans Education Success, VES for short, is to help ensure the success of veterans and family members who are using the GI Bill. They earn this benefit through service to their country, and we work to address the obstacles they face in earning a post-secondary credential. For example, we work with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the House and Senate Veterans Affairs committees to pass a bill that allows GI Bill beneficiaries to continue what had been classroom courses in an online setting. The bill was the result of the coronavirus, which led many schools to send students home and switch to online instruction. The bill became law on March 21st. Without this fix, VA would have cut off GI Bill payments, including payments to beneficiaries who rely on the money to cover their living expenses while they are in school. So today, my presentation is going to focus on the paucity of metrics to evaluate student veteran success in pursuing a post-secondary education after they are discharged from the U.S. military. We use the publicly available VA and Department of Education datasets to tease out insights. So I want to give you some idea about the organization of this presentation. So it's organized around 5 topics. First, I'm going to give you some background on the post-9/11 GI Bill. Then we're going to talk about strengths and challenges in using VA and Ed datasets. I'm going to outline some key data initiatives that were never implemented. And finally, we're going to conclude with some selected VES research findings. So in terms of background about the GI Bill, the first thing I want to let you know is that although a new GI Bill benefit program, the post-9/11 GI Bill, began enrolling beneficiaries in 2009, about 5 older GI Bill benefit programs are still enrolling eligible individuals. However, the post-9/11 benefit is by far the most generous and actually enrolls the most beneficiaries. Unlike the other educational benefit programs, it pays tuition and fees to schools and provides beneficiaries with a separate living and book stipend. So this slide shows you a brief summary of the basic eligibility requirements for the post-9/11 GI Bill and for the other benefit programs. Essentially, you have to have served a minimum of 90 days on active duty after the 9/11 attacks, hence the name of the program, Post-9/11 GI Bill. In addition, you have to have received a discharge. So who's actually eligible? Well, not just veterans. Transfer their benefits they need to do that before they actually leave active duty. The dependents of service members killed in the line of duty are also eligible, both spouses and children. And members of the armed services, once they meet the eligibility requirement of 90 days, are eligible. The National Guard are eligible once they meet that 90-day threshold. So each of the cohorts, individuals that are eligible, the veterans, the service members, the family members, etc., have distinct characteristics which argue for using the publicly available data to separately examine subsets of those eligible for GI Bill benefits. For example, the table compares the demographics of undergraduate versus graduate student veterans. Compared to student veterans in graduate pursuing an undergraduate credential are more likely to be 25 to 34 years old, first-generation college students, have a disability, and be single parents with dependents. The next table compares the demographics of student veterans who enrolled in college for the first time in 2011-12 to those who had left by 2014 with a credential. Veterans who left were more likely to be male, minorities, and working full-time. veterans enrolled in post-secondary education are using the GI Bill. Why would this be? First, they may have exhausted their 36 months of benefits. 60% of veterans who earned a bachelor's degree in 2008 first enrolled at least 10 years earlier. Many veterans attend inexpensive community colleges and may be saving their benefits to earn a bachelor's degree at a four-year institution. And of course, some may not be eligible. So now I'd like to turn to our second topic, which is the data set strengths, weaknesses. Two federal agencies make available data that can be used to evaluate student veteran success in post-secondary education: the Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, and the Department of Education, which I'm going to refer to as ED. From the perspective of analyzing the data sets have both strengths and limitations. First, let's talk about the GI Bill comparison tool. This is a Department of Veterans Affairs product, and it was designed to help veterans make an informed choice when deciding which college to attend. It was not really intended for researchers. Its strengths are that it shows beneficiary enrollment at each school and is useful in tracking trends across institutional sectors: public, nonprofit, and for-profit. So the challenges of using the comparison tool are that you can't distinguish among beneficiary cohorts. For example, it contains no outcome data, and there are no data on veterans who are GI Bill eligible but not using benefits. So another VA data source that we use are annual benefits reports. The strengths of the benefit reports is that they have more detailed data on the GI Bill program being used. They show the attendance level of beneficiaries, that's, for example, part-time versus full-time, but only for beneficiaries who started using the benefit that year. And finally, they indicate whether the beneficiary is a veteran/service member or a dependent. In terms of limitations, they only provide the degree level being pursued or the attendance level for individuals who started using benefits for the fiscal year covered by the report. So let's move on to ED survey data. So there are 3 ED surveys that we use. The National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study, it's the largest survey with over 100,000 participants, and it's conducted once every 4 years. The 2 other surveys are longitudinal surveys, and their samples are drawn from NPSAS. The first is baccalaureate and beyond, and the second is beginning post-secondary students. So baccalaureate and beyond tracks students who earned a bachelor's degree in 2008, and BPS follows students who enrolled in college for the first time in 2011-12. So the strengths of these surveys are that they allow evaluation of GI Bill beneficiary cohorts. So for example, graduate students versus undergraduate veterans, or veterans versus service members. They have outcome data such as graduation, persistence, whether you transferred to a different school, how much you borrowed, and what your repayment status is. And finally, they collect demographic data. So the limitations of these surveys is that the outcome data is at the sector level, not individual institutions. And another drawback is that the surveys, are designed for the general population. And although researchers can focus on veterans, the data is not always as specific as would be desired. So for example, couldn't tell whether or not they were quality. Next education data source is IPEDS. It's basically data provided to the education department by schools themselves. IPEDS distinguishes undergraduate veterans from those seeking graduate degrees. That's its strength. Its limitation is that it only collects data on veterans using the post-9/11 GI Bill. So the last education department data set that we use is called the college scorecard. So the strengths of the college score, it has outcome data, Title IV participating school. Eventually we'll have such data at the program level for each. Its limitations are that it has no veteran-specific outcome data. The metrics have changed several times, and some replacements are not. For example, a high school graduate 10 years after enrollment, and this was replaced with graduates' average earnings 1 year after completing. So the third topic I'd like to address is that since the enactment of the Post-9/11 GI Bill and its implementation in 2009, there have been several attempts to require schools to report veteran outcome metrics. And in general, these attempts have been unsuccessful. In 2013, VA, Ed, and DoD proposed metrics, but they were never implemented because of concern over institutional burden. This year, we provided feedback to Senate and to a House committee bill that it helped strengthen a bill that would require Ed and VA to share data in order to publicly report veteran outcome data on the GI Bill college comparison tool. So as I've mentioned, we use these data sets to tease out insights about veteran success. As demonstrated in the next several slides, we have used multiple data sets to inform our research on specific topics. For example, IPEDS and NIPSS for one report, or the GI Bill comparison tool and the college scorecard for another. To provide context, we often compare student veteran outcomes to those of other students who are older and no longer financially dependent on their parents. The next several slides highlight our research findings from several recent reports. So we recently completed a report on veterans with disabilities, and it looked at their attainment after they enrolled. In general, compared to veterans without a disability, veterans with a disability are more likely to leave school without a credential. However, compared to non-veterans who are disabled, they earn bachelor's degrees at a similar rate. So the next report I want to discuss compared borrowing trends for veterans using and not using GI Bill benefits. We found that almost half of veterans were not using benefits. However, to find out that both groups borrowed similar amounts academic year 2016, and that the proportion of veterans who are not using borrowed was not that much larger than GI Bill beneficiaries who borrow. The last report I'd like to talk about is on first-time students and whether or not they completed a degree. So you could compare non-veteran independent students, undergraduate students persist and earn a degree. The demographics of those who left without a degree highlight some of the risk factors underlying non-completion. Many were the first in the college. They didn't have a traditional high school diploma. They worked full-time, and they were single or married with dependents. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that no data set is perfect. We work with the data sets that we have, and we try to be very cognizant of the strengths and limitations of the data sets that we use. I worked for 40 years at GAO, and I can tell you that my experience is that there is no such thing as a perfect data set. So in concluding, I would like to thank you for listening to this presentation. And I'd like to acknowledge my research colleague, Kathy Pei, who does all the heavy lifting with the data sets that we use. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.